You mentioned in your email you've been doing quite a lot of work on the inner critic. Tell me a bit more about that.
Literally the worst time of my life, I didn't feel able to share. I just thought people would kind of recoil and away from me.
So the judgments that we have of ourselves, we sort of assume that those judgments other people have towards us. And it can be very vulnerable territory.
I feel kind of stupid for not realising this is so like glaringly obvious now.
Welcome to this week's episode of In Therapy with me, Alex Howard. And this week we're catching up again with Hannah. You may remember from some of Hannah's previous episodes, we've been exploring the theme of the inner critic. This is this part of our mind that we all have, which is constantly criticizing us, judging us, making us feel smaller and less than we really are. One of the ways the inner critic plays up is we can find ourselves projecting our inner critic onto other people. So it feels like everyone else is judging us and criticizing us, when actually often what's the case is it's our own judgments of ourselves coming back through those projections. And seeing this pattern can be tough to see, but incredibly liberating as well. So here's Hannah in this week's episode of In Therapy.
It's a little bit over a week after the Zoom call. Basically, I just came out of that session feeling so relieved. I always seem to come out of sessions just feeling so much more relaxed and like less stressed and reassured. Like my mum said I look like a different person walking through the house. I just find it so valuable having that outsider's perspective from the sessions. That seems to be one of the biggest helps. And so yeah, since then, the last week, my mood has really improved. And I also think it's helped by the fact I'm no longer totally overwhelmed by all these different emotions anymore. I just feel a lot more calmer and happier. When I come into my body and do those exercises, I'm not crying, I'm not like super emotional, I'm just feeling like there's less going on in there. Something I've wanted to do for a while is to start tracking like my symptoms, and I saw Alex's video about that recently. That's what I've done this week, and I've started recording it on like a little calendar. Hopefully I can see now in the future, just when I'm having a bad time, you know, what is actually going on here. So I've been doing the homework Alex set, keeping an inner critic perfectionist diary. I definitely realise how both of those things are worse when I'm in a crash or when my symptoms flare up, or if I'm doing something that makes me feel a little bit vulnerable. I actually just stopped what I was doing to make this vlog because I noticed it in the biggest way for the first time. I've got a headache, but it was starting to turn into a migraine, and I noticed my inner critic jump in. Seeing some of the stuff that comes up is a little bit like depressing. It feels like my self-worth takes quite a dip in those moments, and I can see that I've probably got more to work on here than I thought initially. Some of the stuff that I wrote down that I'm noticing is just, when you look at it objectively, it's funny, like it's really silly, and like, but yet in the moment I'm just so totally consumed by it in my thoughts, and then the kind of feelings I have in my body as well, feelings of like shame or embarrassment or whatever. So I'm looking forward to like learning the tools more on how to like deal with this.
Hi Hannah, how are you doing?
Yeah, all right, thanks. You?
Very good, thank you. So how are you doing?
Yeah, all right.
Yeah?
I feel like I've got a lot more awareness about stuff since we last spoke.
Okay.
I think last time I didn't really have like an idea of like how, I didn't have many examples to share about like what was going on. But doing the homework has kind of helped with that.
Okay, that's great. Before we come into that, just give me a bit of an update of how you've been doing physically. So just in terms of energy, migraines, just sort of give me an update on that side.
Energy, I feel like is like gradually improving. I feel like I'm getting towards where I was when I first met you in January, where I've been doing a little better, like just a bit more stable. So I've been able to do my walk every other day. I'm still struggling a lot with headaches and the odd migraine. Headaches are like kind of most days seems like a bit of a thing, but yeah.
Is there any rhythm of what you're aware of what is making them better or worse, or sort of do they seem to be impacted by anything in particular?
Yeah, I've started actually tracking like on a calendar my symptoms because I wanted to get a better understanding of it. I know that stress does definitely, and I think feeling wired, and that can sometimes, when I'm in my head, it's almost like that triggers a headache sometimes. But also just, I know that I struggle to stick to my baseline in terms of the cognitive side of things.
So if you're wired or you do too much cognitively, then that seems to be a trigger to the headaches.
Yeah, definitely.
And if you manage to stay at your cognitive baseline and you don't get wired, then they're the days you tend not to then have the headaches. Is that right?
Seems to be.
Okay, great, good. All right, so coming back to the increased awareness. So what have you been seeing? I'm curious as to what's been, so just sort of going into it with that kind of looking and having more awareness around it. Yeah, what have you noticed?
If I'm like disappointed about something, I tend to take it out on myself, or if I'm in a crash, the same thing. It's like inner critic and the perfectionist patterns like all dial up in those circumstances. And I realised like I'm definitely in like a bit of a habit of like looking for things to beat myself up with. Like I can have a really positive event or something can happen that's really good and I'll come away feeling great, but then just like give me enough time and I'll just start like actually like looking for things, it seems, to kind of feel anxious or like ashamed about.
So it's almost like your brain is tuned into almost like radio station anxiety, like it's actively going looking for those things.
Yeah, definitely. And it feels like I always need to be better or do better next time, because it's kind of like I have this thing of like I always think I'm going to be dropped by people or by things if I make a mistake or don't do the exact right thing. And I think I maybe realise that how insecure I am still with myself and certain relationships, and it just takes me a long time to feel like I can trust someone or anything. And I'm definitely just like, being vulnerable in like even the smallest of ways seems to just trigger my system like a lot with the whole sweating thing. And I realize I'm also really worried about like being inaccurate, because then it could mean I'm like being dishonest or deceptive, and that seems to be like some huge thing.
Okay. So there's a sort of perfectionist pattern around, I need to get it right, otherwise somehow I could be misleading someone or being sort of dishonest around something.
Yeah, and that seems to be like a really big deal for some reason. Like I'm terrified of that.
Interesting. How about the inner critic sort of judgment piece? So these I think these are all sort of examples of that in a sense, but I'm wondering also about those sort of more explicit sort of giving yourself a hard time and beating up on yourself.
The last time I was like, after we last spoke, one of the things you asked me was like, what am I thinking now? And I realized like I was actually thinking like, oh, Alex probably thinks I'm talking too much. Does he want me to be more articulate or just like shut up? And then in my vlogs and stuff, you sound too arrogant and like you think you know everything. That's like me talking about myself. How like have I just used my dad as a scapegoat, not taking enough responsibility for your problems? Like how will you ever be able to have intimacy with anyone when your body is like this? It's just quite endless.
So can you see that part of what is happening here is there is a sort of projecting of your inner critic onto others? So the sort of assuming that others are thinking about you in a sort of critical, sort of harsh way. Does that sort of make sense? So there's different there's different ways, different styles, sort of how the inner critic can work. And one way is that we're just sort of very much attacking ourselves. And there's obviously some of that that's going on. But another way that it can work is that we project it onto others. And so others almost become versions of our inner critic in a sense. And so it's almost like how you've learned to sort of know and meet the world is, at least in part, through your relationship with your dad. And there, of course, there are other facets and elements in your history, but that's one theme that obviously we've explored a bit. And there was a sort of harshness and kind of coldness and cruelty and sort of critical kind of nature of that, in a sense. And so what you've learned is, and particularly when we're younger, it's sort of like our parents are the world, in a sense, like how we learn about how the world is through our relationship with our parents. And it's sort of like, as our horizons broaden, we start to get other influences and other sort of impacts. But particularly as small children, it's like, if parents are critical, the world is critical. If parents are kind of unavailable, the world feels unholding and unsupportive. So we sort of learn, particularly sort of between about 3 and 7, we sort of learn how we believe the world is by how those relationships are. So a lot of the sort of wiring of your inner critic is based upon some of this dynamic and some of this relationship. And so when you're around others, then sort of what's happening is your dad's criticism is sort of coming at you through others in a sort of projected way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely makes sense. Yeah, because a lot of the things that I'm projecting feel like things I'd anticipate him saying to me sometimes. But even though they're things I would argue with and defend myself against, I'm still kind of telling myself those things.
What's it like to recognize that, to sort of see that you're not actually experiencing people as they are, you're experiencing your projections onto people? And when I say you, everyone does this in their own way. So this is not like a kind of spotlight on this being some terrible dysfunctional thing that you're doing. Everyone does this in different ways, but just to see it in your own experience, what's that like?
It's weird, and it's kind of hard because it's clear that from what you've said, like, this doesn't have to, it's not the real thing. It's not what's actually happening. It's all what I'm doing. And so it definitely makes me want to stop. Like, it's so much unnecessary, like, stress, unhappiness.
So let's take, I appreciate it's quite a vulnerable example to take, and I appreciate you bringing it forth. Let's take the example of last time we were working together, and you're sort of, what if Alex is sort of thinking this? And I don't remember obviously that exact moment because that was a moment, but let me give you a general sense of what my experience is when we're working together. I think it's sometimes helpful to reality check these things, because it's sort of like we live in a sort of virtual reality, in a sense, of all the stuff that's going on. And sometimes it's helpful just to sort of see through that. So when I'm working with you, much of my experience is I feel empathy in my heart. I feel sort of a softness towards your experience. I'm in my mind, I'm sort of positioning things and thinking, how am I going to frame that? I'm sort of checking that I'm sort of tuned into what's happening. I'm trying to make sure that what I'm saying is landing right. And if it's not, I'm sort of tuning into what have I missed, or what am I. So that's normally when I'm working, and when we're working together, that's sort of my internal processes. It's partly how do I feel, what's in my heart, and it's partly my intellect to sort of trying to figure out where we are, and then it's sort of going with the flow of the moment. What's not happening is in my mind thinking things like, oh my God, I wish Hannah would shut up, or my God, is she what's, you know, that criticism. And it's not that I'm incapable of being critical towards people, it's like, but that's not what's happening for me in my experience. What's it like to just hear that?
Like, yeah, it's a relief. I do just feel like I need reassurance all the time, and that's something I'd like, obviously, to change. But it does help right in this moment to like hear that.
Yeah. Because I think this is a really good example of, if you can see it, you don't have to be it. That if you can start to penetrate with your awareness these projections and this sort of way that you're creating a sort of artificial virtual reality based upon your history, so based upon how the world was in the past, that's then being projected. So it's like you're recreating that reality moment to moment by the way that it's being projected. And if you can increasingly see those projections and to challenge those projections and sometimes, and of course it depends upon who you're talking to and what the sort of context is, but sometimes it's helpful to reality check them. And, you know, for example, if you're with a friend and you think you've said something that, and you're running a whole kind of a projection around, I've upset and offended this person, that if it's someone that it feels appropriate and safe to do so, to say, I just wanted to check out, when I said that, I've been kind of worrying that upset you or hurt you. Can you just let me know how you are? Is that okay? The reality checking that sometimes, what it starts to do is it starts to sort of expose the critic for what it is. And it's sort of like, it goes from being a statement of truth and fact to, this is just something that my brain has learned to do as a way of trying to keep me safe in the world. But actually, it's sort of, it's most likely not, in the vast majority of situations, actually reality.
That makes sense. Yeah. I think with friends, I do feel now much more capable of doing stuff like that. And I think that's why I thought that I'd kind of got over this, because with my friendships, I'm for the most part, I probably have, but the patterns are still coming up with new people and with new experiences.
I also want to speak to the fact that in this context, you know, it's one thing, you know, it's challenging enough for most people just doing therapeutic work with someone, but what you're also doing in terms of being filmed and sharing that with the world,
Yeah.
as much as I think you do feel that it's, hopefully you feel that it's been done in a very careful and sensitive sort of way,
Yeah.
it's still enormously courageous. And, you know, if you, I don't know how much you've looked at comments on the different your episodes and other people's episodes, of how many people are like, basically, holy shit, I can't believe that people are brave enough to do that. That I wonder how that is, to sort of to recognize that despite the fact that there's those projected judgments, that you have the courage to put yourself out there.
Yeah, I feel good about it, and I know like how hard it is for me to do it as well. Like I know that, say like this time last year, I think there's probably no way I could have done this. So it feels good that progress is being made in, at least, you know, in some areas. I think seeing Lauren and Sally was really inspiring, because I could kind of see how brave they were being, and that, yeah, inspired me to like, yeah, carry on and do it.
Are you able to give yourself the same admiration that you're able to give them?
Sometimes. I'd say it's like work in progress.
Yeah. But it sounds like sometimes you are able to.
Yeah. I think sometimes I am, and other times I'm like incredibly like harsh about it. And sometimes it takes me time to like, I see an episode or whatever, and I'm like super harsh to myself, and then give it a bit of time and I might be able to relax.
Yeah. Part of what has sort of given me what, you know, because I had quite a big moral question for myself before we started doing this series. Like, was this okay? Like, was it okay to take people on a very potentially vulnerable process and sort of put it out there? And sort of one of the things that heavily influenced me around that was my own experience putting out my first book, which was basically just like my most vulnerable, painful stuff, like served up for the world, and what it was like to do that, and actually how amazingly liberating it was to go, this is me at my most vulnerable, and to actually be loved more in my vulnerability than I had ever experienced in myself, in a sense. There's something about that that's actually very powerful, about putting oneself, having the courage to put yourself out in that more vulnerable place, and actually get some reassurance and some support that you're okay and you're loved and you're respected and you're appreciated in that place.
Yeah, that's true. It's good when you put it like that. I think I can see that.
Coming back to this sort of projected sort of inner critic, I think it's also, if we go back to something you mentioned today, but we touched on a bit more previously around, for example, the sweating around people. And we talked about previously as well, the sort of being the SUD score, the kind of maladaptive stress response increasing when around people. I think a big part of that is that, in a sense, you're not actually just experiencing being around that person. You're experiencing that person with a projected inner critic. So you, in a sense, the more you're around someone, particularly someone that's unfamiliar or you don't know, or if there's someone you know really well, but it's a kind of sensitive, delicate relationship, that there's all the inner critic stuff. And that, I think, is a big part of actually what's then triggering your system.
That gives me like hope that, well, yeah, I feel reassured by that, because that's like a clear thing to work on.
Does that fit your experience as well? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think so. I think still that it relates to stuff we talked about before, anxiety side of things, about my system just being on alert, because there are people that I don't, like with friends I feel so comfortable with now, but I'm still having that reaction.
Yeah.
So I think that might be what we talked about before, but then what you just said with new people and other things makes total sense.
I even think, though, with friends that you feel comfortable with, I still think there's probably some of that projected inner critic that's going on in those situations. Okay. I might be wrong, and I think the only way we find that out is by exploring it further, in a sense.
I have a lot of, and there's definitely some main ones that spring to mind automatically that are just like on the regular.
So what would be some examples of those?
People think that I'm a layabout, that I'm not working hard to improve my health or improve my life, or that I have this like lethargic kind of passive approach to my life. Because I live at home and I work, and
that's a particularly common one, I think, people in the ME chronic fatigue community have, that they think people don't get the reality of the suffering and the physicality of their experience.
I guess just general like that I'm not that I'm too involved in myself, that I'm way too talk about myself too much, not interested enough in them, not being like open about everything.
Yes, there's a kind of another category then, which is sort of you're being selfish or self-indulgent or kind of self-centered sort of thing.
Definitely, yeah.
Well, what else? And then obviously more will come from the homework, but is there anything else particularly that comes to mind right now?
I think just that I don't do anything, and that I don't have like interests, and I'm boring, and probably just how clearly, visibly like anxious or nervous I can be.
The more that you can penetrate that with your awareness and sort of see through it, the more it takes the potency out of it, in a sense.
Okay, yeah. I think what I found from doing this homework so far is that when I write things down in the moment, I'm so consumed by it, and it feels so real, and it like I can feel it in my body. I believe what I'm telling myself. Then later, like when I have distance from it, a few days it might take though, I'll read it and just I know that it's irrational sometimes or just really ridiculous, but and I can see that, and it's hard to believe that I ever thought those things. But in the moment, it's just so all-consuming. I'm so consumed by it.
Yeah. So in a sense, what you're doing is there's a kind of series of stages to seeing it. So the stage you're describing at the moment is seeing it with the benefit of hindsight, like when you can sort of look back. The next stage is to be able to see it when it's happening, that you sort of build enough awareness that even if there's some emotional charge and trigger, you can sort of see it for what it is. And then the sort of next stage is that you see it enough that the seeing stops it, in a sense. And sometimes at that stage, we also want to bring in things like stop process and other kind of techniques to sort of get some defense from it. But that awareness can be enormously powerful. In terms of the reset program content, you've been doing modules 6, 7, and 8, and then you went to the inner critic module, right? In terms of where you are going through it.
I did 6 and 7 when we first started, and then I think you said to just work my way through. So I went to 1, 2, 3, and I've just finished 4.
Okay.
With the stop process.
Perfect.
So I've not,
That's perfect. So I think also the other thing you could do is bring in the stop process when you notice that these patterns are happening. So as you start to get, with practice, awareness when it's happening, one of the things that you can do with that is then use the stop to stop that pattern in that moment.
And I'm finding that I need to make sure that I'm not trying to stop my actual feelings.
That's right.
As well. Yeah.
And sometimes that's a bit of a delicate, like, is it a thought? Is it a feeling? And there's a certain sort of figuring out of that as well.
I think it helped that we did the emotion stuff first, because.
Yeah, that was quite deliberate for you. I figured otherwise it wouldn't be so helpful. Yeah.
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 Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's been really helpful.
No, you're really welcome. So I will talk to you in 3 weeks, and keep doing what you're doing, and just go gently. This is obviously quite delicate material, so just be gentle with yourself in the process.
Will do. Thank you.
Right. Right. Thanks, Hannah. Take care. Bye.
I just finished the Zoom call. I'm wearing a different top because I had to change it, obviously. It's sweats, but I feel really happy with how that went. I'm so glad that I shared how I felt about how I feel insecure just about, doing these sessions, and Alex reassured me, and I kind of just feel a lot better now. It felt good to just say that. I feel like next time I'm going to be able to be a lot more comfortable and just confident, kind of talking about what I feel I need to, and I definitely feel more trusting now, and that feels really nice. I feel regret that it took this long for me to explain this, and I wish that I could have felt like this earlier on, because I think it would have made the whole process a lot easier, and I feel like now I can really hear what Alex is saying, because I'm so less concerned about doing the whole thing right. I feel like I'm really feeling the support more now. I actually forgot I planned to bring something up that I've been wanting to for a while, but wasn't sure if it was appropriate. I was kind of nervous, and I just totally forgot, which I'm annoyed about. I'm going to try not to beat myself up about that and just use a stop process, because I'm sure give me 5 minutes, I'll probably have plenty of things going around my head. I'll bring it up next time. I just feel like I'm looking forward to next time rather than feeling worried and anxious. So yeah, I feel really good. It's really nice.
So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of In Therapy. It's always helpful when watching these episodes, I think, to reflect upon your own patterns and your own experience. How do you project your judgments onto the people in your life? I'd love to hear your reflections, your comments. Please do comment below this video. Please do also like the video if you haven't already. Please do subscribe to my channel here on YouTube. Click the notification bell. It's a great way of telling YouTube that you like the episodes. You'll see more, but also YouTube will then show them to more people. So next week, we're going to be catching up with Lauren, and we're going to be exploring how to break bad habits. One of the things that can often happen is we start to make progress and we move forwards, and then the very habits and patterns that cause us to get stuck in the first place can start to come in again. And that's what we're exploring next week on In Therapy. Thanks for watching.
I don't have as many triggers at the moment. The only real pressure I have is my work. And I did find that I was getting back into some bad habits there.
You're on a sort of temporary reprieve from some of these achiever patterns, helper patterns, anxiety patterns, all of that stuff. as lockdown lifts and also as your energy continues to improve and as you start to come back into the world, it's how do we do that in such a way that those patterns don't then start hijacking and then start taking control again.
I eat my breakfast and lunch at my desk, which is another bad habit.
We have to break the cycle of that now. If you can't break it now, you've got no chance of breaking it down the line when you've got more energy to get away with it.